For everyone out there, my name's Seamus Reardon, and today we have Robert Brennan, who's currently the director of open source software at Fairwinds. So good to see you, Robert.
Yeah, thanks, Seamus. Thanks for having me here.
So Robert has agreed to join us this morning on the DevDC podcast, which is geared towards the growth and development of engineers. So he's going to talk a little bit about his career, what he's seeing in the industry, and then share any advice or insights he might have.
Yeah, I'm excited to get started here.
Awesome. Thanks. So let's just kick it off and hear about your story, Robert. You're an interesting guy. I've known you for quite some time. I'll let you kick it off where you want it to begin.
Cool. Yeah, I guess the start of my career as a software engineer probably begins in college. I started as a math major at Columbia University and quickly realized I didn't really have the theoretical skills in order to be a mathematician, and I ended up doing a second degree in the engineering school, which was much more my speed. I really like being hands-on with things. I've found I like building things. I like seeing the fruits of my work come to like on the screen, rather than just doing like pen and paper type proofs. So I found I found software engineering to be a lot more rewarding, and never really looked back at the kind of theoretical math side of things. I got an internship in my first semester as a computer science student at Google, working on the search engine, doing the titles and descriptions of search results there, which was a really fun internship. It was the first internship I had where I was really like given the power to actually do things instead of just like fetch coffee and make copies and things like that. And it was really cool. I really enjoyed it. I actually made a change that got shipped into Google search during that internship. And that was a really rewarding feeling. That was the first time I really did something that was like valuable to the world as a software engineer. And it was addictive. Honestly, it was a very great feeling to be able to kind of go to my parents and friends and be like, here's the change that I made. Here's how Google search is now different based on the work that I did over the summer. So that feeling definitely grabbed me. I ended up moving full-time to Google after graduating. And I ended up working there for about 3 years on that same exact team. I had such a blast there during my internship. It was kind of a no-brainer for me to join up and work there full time. So those were my first days, all very oriented towards like natural language processing and kind of the languagey side of machine learning. Was very interesting to me. That was kind of how I got my start.
So as long as I've known you've always been a very humble guy, right? So you appreciate you reflecting back on you going from a math major and being more focused on, or thinking that really engineering was more up your alley. Addictive is one word that I think like stuck out when you were talking about your first real internship where you got to kind of have a little bit more autonomy at Google. It's funny because we both interned at Iron Mountain, and I was like, yeah, I kind of understand. Yeah. We did our time, but part of this podcast, right, is talking to people who are exploring their careers. And what would you say you look for when you're looking at interviewing for people now that you've made your way over to like a director role?
Yeah. So the two buckets that I put my thoughts into are basically technical skills, right? Just the ability to do the work involved in the job is obviously very important, but maybe even more importantly is that sort of personality, culture fit kind of aspect of things. And specifically, I'm looking at things like an appetite for learning, flexibility, the ability to be, a member of a team. More than once, I've found technically very, very qualified candidates, people who are, rock stars in terms of their ability to write code, to, understand a problem, but there was so much ego there that I just knew, they'd be a nightmare to work with. And I think we've all had that experience of working with somebody who is, great at doing the thing that they were hired for, but just not a team player, not the kind of person that you can work well with. And they end up being a lot more disruptive than they are helpful. And so that's always the really hard thing for me when I'm hiring is finding one of those candidates who just kills it on the technical portion of the interview and still having to say no, because I know that they're just going to lead to headaches. They're going to rub their teammates the wrong way. They're not going to be the kind of person who mentors their teammates. They're not going to be the kind of person who listens to criticism well. And learning to say no to those people is probably the hardest thing to do as a hiring manager.
Yep. You kind of ended your career talk at like Google, right? Did you get, I guess, that understanding of what a good candidate is based on your time at Google, or, when did you determine like, hey, it's not just about the technical skills, it's more about like, hey, do I want to be around this person and they got to add value to the team?
Yeah, I would say, so Google does a great job in their hiring process. That was the first time I started interviewing candidates, was at Google, but it was as like an individual contributor.
That's cool.
Looking more at technical skill.
Sure.
The reason Google does such a great job at hiring is that they have so many incoming candidates that they can be as picky as they want and
Absolutely.
still get the top tier, right?
Yeah.
So I would honestly say Google was great because anybody who had, if there was any question about their technical ability or there was any question about their cultural fit, they would just say no.
Sure.
They would rather reject 10 qualified candidates than let one unqualified person or one problematic person in. And so that was, a very unique position to be in. But I can honestly say I loved every single one of my coworkers at Google. They were all incredibly smart. They were all just wonderfully nice people, willing to listen and mentor and teach each other. And it was a really cool environment for that reason. You don't have as much of that in a startup setting, right? You you have to sell people a little bit more, and you have to pick through a lot more resumes, and it's a much harder hiring process. You don't just have fish jumping in the boat, right?
Sure.
And I would say it's in that startup setting that it was the first time I kind of had to work with people who, again, were technically very competent, but, maybe not the easiest people to work with. And that's when it was really in that startup atmosphere that I started to piece together how important it is to look at people's culture fit, to look at how much you would enjoy working with them in addition to their technical ability.
Right. So, I mean, you left Google for a startup, and, you mentioned there are people that, you had millions of, I don't know, maybe not millions, but you had certainly way more applicants than what you needed to fill positions at Google. Like what made you like make the jump from, one of the best sought after companies to work for in the world, and you were working on search, which is like their main, money maker. And now, what made you leave? What made you say, hey, there's something else out there that I want to go after myself?
Yeah, you can imagine I get that question a lot.
I know a lot of people at Google do it though, so it's got to be part of what they're looking for. But
it's so I had never honestly planned on working for a giant multinational company. It was I got that internship and I really enjoyed the work I was doing and decided to go for it. And I learned a lot at my time there. I loved my time there. But I'd always been interested in working for myself. I'd always been interested in entrepreneurship. And, I found myself at the age of about 26. I guess I just realized that this was a unique time in my life where I didn't have a lot of commitments. I didn't have a family or a mortgage yet or anything like that. So I was like, you know what, if I'm going to try and, take a giant risk, now's the time to do it. And I went for it. It was, I quit with no plan, which was probably a little rash, but I ended up starting a company with my brother, and we worked for about 4 years doing a combination of services and software, and we had a blast doing it.
Nice.
It was a lot of fun. It was really cool working for myself. I got to see, a lot more parts of the business. I think one of the problems with, being an engineer at Google is that you or a company, like Google, a company that size, is you really are just focused on the one thing that you're supposed to
Sure.
be working on. You're
Yeah.
just doing engineering work on one tiny piece of the product. You don't really get that holistic vision of the product life cycle. You don't really see the sales side of things, the marketing side of things, the financial side of things. That's all kind of obscured away from you. There are other people taking care of that.
Yeah.
And so, when I left to do my own thing, I found I got to wear 30 different hats. I got to be the sales guy, the marketing guy, the financial guy. And my brother, luckily, was able to take care of a lot of the sales and marketing thing for me, because I'm not good at that and the financial thing. And I got to focus on the engineering stuff, but it was still, I had to be involved in those decisions. I had to, I had to make, end hiring decisions when we did hire contractors and stuff like that. And it's really fun to just get to see every piece of the business and how it all comes together, and work hand in hand with the customers, and have to do all that kind of more human level communication and things like that. It was definitely a crash course for me. It was a big culture shock, going from
Oh,
like, I only
sure.
have to do my one little thing to I have to do all the things.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm sure it was awesome growth though during that time.
For sure. Yeah, no, it was, I think it was a little bit of a shock to me in the first year or so, like how much I didn't know. I think I was a little too confident going into it, thinking like, yeah, I'll figure it all out.
Yeah,
It'll be
sure.
fine.
Yeah.
And there was so much that I had to learn in that first year, even from an engineering perspective. I at Google, not only is all the sales and marketing and finance stuff taken care of for you, but like all the software infrastructure stuff is taken care of for you. So I didn't know how to ship a production application. I didn't know how to, provision servers and launch things in a scalable way or anything like that. I had to learn DevOps from scratch, basically, because I just never had to learn that at Google.
Yeah, that's really cool.
So that first year was definitely a crash course in how to launch an application.
Yeah.
End to end.
So when you look back at it, right? I mean, you've had a cool career. And I know it's just beginning. Like, I'm super excited for you guys at Fairwinds. I would love to have you talk about that a little bit. But before we get into that, like, you look back at what you've done, since Columbia, let's say you're, Robert, just graduating, like, what advice would you give someone, and say like who's just entering their career, or maybe who's looking to grow as an engineer?
The advice I'd give is to, spend that first, 5 to 10 years of your career just learning as much as possible.
Yeah.
I would say one of the things I would probably do if I went back is, rather than, so I learned a ton at Google, and I'm glad I did a few years there. I learned from some really, really just brilliant people. I think it would have been helpful for me to, rather than going out and just trying to start my own thing straight out of Google, would be to go to a startup, like a 30-person startup-ish, a place with, maybe a dozen or so engineers, and just see what it's like working at that kind of scale. Because it was such a culture shock for me to go from, 50,000 engineers to one engineer. I think I would have picked up some more best practices around things like deployment and the software development lifecycle, and how to be kind of an agile startup with a just starting to find product market fit, rather than going from Google search to a tiny brand new startup. I think I would have learned a lot more had I spent a year or two in that kind of setting.
Right. I think it's easy to look back at it and have an understanding of what you should have done as far as career growth. It's funny that you say like going to a startup early would make sense, because I kind of feel the same way. Like I interned, in finance. I interned in call it like lobbying or international business, and I interned at Iron Mountain. And then my reasoning at that time was like, hey, I don't know really what I want to do. I want to get experience in all these things and then go back. And like looking back at it, my the culture at Iron Mountain, what I was doing in sales and marketing, was my best fit. And it's like, hey, I could have landed at a tech company that was a startup, and like as an intern, or like first 1 or 2 years, if you're showing up and you're working hard and you're like, bringing in like a good attitude every day, you're going to be able to experience every single part of the business. So yeah, like I totally feel you there. I think that a lot of people chase like a really big name, not like that's not a really good thing, because there's enormous value that's brought as far as networking and mentors and things like that. But I think right off the bat, like a startup's pretty good bet if you're not totally sure. So that brings us to Fairwinds kind of naturally. I know we're skipping a little bit over like LucyBot, the startup that you and Andrew had, and I think you did a couple other things. But yeah, I mean, Fairwinds, like what excites you about that? What's going on? Would love to hear about that.
Yeah, so with Fairwinds, I feel like I've found this perfect middle ground between the giant enterprise with 50,000 developers versus like my own tiny little thing, with one engineer plus a few contractors. Fairwinds, we have, it's about a 30 to 40 person company. It's still small enough that I get to wear a lot of hats. I get to, write blog posts for marketing. I get to sit in on sales calls. I get to do all sorts of fun stuff, around the business as a whole. But I also get to focus mainly on the thing that I'm good at, which is engineering, right?
Yeah.
So I love that. So I guess, yeah, for background on Fairwinds, we do Kubernetes software and services. So we're really, the mission of the company is to help folks be successful with Kubernetes. We started as mainly a consultancy where we would do hands-on keyboard work with folks that wanted to build out a set of Kubernetes clusters and then manage those going forward. And basically what we would do is we would manage the underlying infrastructure. We would manage the clusters themselves, as well as the stuff that gets layered on top, like DNS and ingress and certificate management and all those kind of undifferentiated things. And then we would leave it to our customers to basically take care of everything related to their application. So writing the Docker file for their app and shipping it into the clusters and all that was kind of left to them. But the problem was we saw them making the same mistakes over and over and over again. They would do things that weren't secure, things that wouldn't scale. Just a few things off the top of my head, like they would have their containers running as root when they didn't need to, which has all sorts of security concerns attached to it. They wouldn't specify how much CPU and memory their application should be using. And then their clusters would just fall over. The applications would fall over. And they'd get mad at us saying like, why, you're supposed to be in charge of the infrastructure. We'd be like, you did all this stupid stuff that this is why your app fell over.
Sure.
So we built some software to basically help them ensure that they were doing everything the right way, according to best practices, doing things in a secure way. And that software is called Fairwinds Insights. That's really where I came in at Fairwinds. I was the first full-time software engineer at Fairwinds. I came on about 2 years ago, building this platform, Fairwinds Insights. And the idea is that we can scan your Kubernetes cluster, scan all your applications inside of it, and basically bubble up a set of action items for anything that looks like it's kind of deviating from best practices or deviating from your own internal policies, whether it's around security or efficiency or reliability. We basically give you a dashboard and a health score saying like, here's how you're doing, here's how you're improving over time, here's what you should be focused on. And it's been really successful. We've had a lot of success helping our customers basically be a lot more secure and efficient and reliable with their Kubernetes deployments.
Sure.
Kubernetes is such a big, broad ecosystem. It's kind of hard to wrap your mind around. It's there's a lot of unknowns when you're deploying Kubernetes. And I think we've successfully helped to make it a little bit more easier to get your hands around and feel like you know that at least what you need to be doing in order to be more secure, be more reliable, be more efficient.
Okay. What I hear is engineers want the benefits of Kubernetes. They don't necessarily want to learn it. Does that help like align to what you guys are doing at Fairwinds?
That definitely rings true. Yeah.
Okay.
There's I think one of the tough things with Kubernetes is that the easiest way to get things running is to do it in a really insecure and really kind of naive way. Like for instance, a lot of teams when they first deploy to Kubernetes, if they tell Kubernetes how much CPU and memory that their application should be using at all, which often they'll just leave that unspecified and Kubernetes is left to guess.
Yeah.
If they specify it at all, though, they'll add 5 times as much as they actually need, because then they know their application's not going to get like shut down because it's using too much memory or CPU, and that ends up costing the company 5 times as much money as it should, right?
Right.
And so you really need somebody in there saying like, hey, you asked for 20 gigabytes of memory for this application. It's only using 2 gigabytes of memory. Maybe you should tune that down.
Yeah.
So yeah, and then there's a lot of like insecure ways to set things up just to get the application running. And the developer often feels like, well, it's running, the website loads, it's fine, ship it, we're fine.
Sure.
And they don't want to ask all those questions about, well, like what happens when we get a whole bunch of traffic? Is it going to scale up appropriately?
Right.
What happens if an attacker finds their way into, finds a little hole in the application? Are they going to be able to, get into our database? Are they going to be able to spread throughout the cluster and find things that they shouldn't be able to get into? And it really takes a lot of discipline to, not just say, hey, the app's working, it's fine, let it go. You really have to say, okay, are we doing things securely, reliably, efficiently?
Right. I mean, I hear, provisioning, and then I also hear like dashboard. And to me, that's like means you're probably talking to the application owners or the people that are actual engineers. And then you're probably talking to management too, right? Is that, yeah. And then does your dashboard show like cost management with the cloud? Yeah.
Yeah. So, in terms of persona, I would say we sit kind of between dev and ops, right?
Okay.
So we often, I think one of the best stories I hear is that, a DevOps team who's, in charge of all the infrastructure, says that, they've been hounding the development team like, hey, you have to do things more securely, you have to do things more efficiently, you need to change this, this, and this. And the development team just kind of ignores them. They're like, hey, the app's running, like, don't worry about it, it'll be fine. And the ops team really feels like they don't have the buy-in from the development team. And when they get the insights dashboard in front of them, it makes it easier for them to say, hey, look, this third party that's an expert in security, they're an expert in Kubernetes, they're saying that you need to do this. It gives them kind of some extra clout, some extra something extra to lean on. And they can put up a health score and say, hey, team A, look how bad you're doing compared to team B. They can really start to gamify, I guess, the security and efficiency and reliability aspects of deploying it to Kubernetes. And yeah, in terms of cost versus security, I would say we're probably like 2/3 security, 1/3 cost.
Okay.
We've been really focused on security and policy and governance, because we're really seeing the most pain and need there. But there's also definitely, especially around COVID, budgets got a little bit tighter.
Yeah.
So we have definitely seen a little bit of uptick in interest around cost efficiency and things like that. So we have some cool features around that.
That's awesome. Yeah, I mean, Kubernetes is obviously a super hot spot. I am curious, just taking a step back and you just putting like your developer hat on, right? And when you're thinking about like what's cool out there, right? We're seeing a lot of interesting change in technology, and things are starting to speed up. And besides like Kubernetes, like what else out there kind of catches your eye and is like, hey, this is super interesting?
Yeah, I think in general, the way that the open source ecosystem has flourished over the last decade or so has been really amazing to see. I think there's two major developments there that made things really exciting. One is just the advent of GitHub. I mean, it's hard to understate just how important GitHub has been for the open source world. The fact that I can now, publish my source code online for free. I can engage a whole community of developers for free. It's become a central place for developers to gather and work on things together in the open. And there's just this, because of that, there's this huge flourishing open source ecosystem where now, like, I can write, an enterprise grade application without having to do all sorts of crazy work around, the database and authentication. And like, there's all this kind of undifferentiated work that I would have had to do 10, 15 years ago to get an application up and running. That now is just I can just kind of stitch together all this open source, like Lego blocks. I can just kind of piece them together, and I can just focus on, what I do best, or, what the like sort of differentiating features of my application, which makes it, a much easier place for startups to play in.
Yeah.
It's a much more, competitive environment. Anybody can start a software company today. Anybody can.
Yeah,
start
it's wonderful,
SaaS.
isn't it? Yeah, it's great.
It's really cool.
Yep.
It's tough for the incumbents, but
it makes everyone better, though. Right?
Exactly. And it allows us all to focus on, again, what we do best, rather than focusing on all that undifferentiated work. So I love the open source ecosystem and how it's been blooming. And then the other half on top of GitHub, I think that I find really interesting is we're finding ways to monetize open source. I think the community's still really trying to figure out how, what commercial open source looks like, what business models around open source look like. But the biggest issue with open source right now, I would say, is that it's often unsustainable. You're relying on, a small community of volunteers who are overworked, often just working in their off hours or on weekends and things like that. It's kind of a thankless job a lot of the time. People just complain and open bugs, and it's hard to expect those volunteers to just in perpetuity keep working on this software. So I really am excited that there are some big companies who are investing in open source. Kubernetes is a great example where, it's backed by Google.
Right.
There are folks from companies like Red Hat and, just all over the place contributing to that software. They have full-time engineers working just on this open source project. And that's really amazing to see, because that's what creates a really sustainable open source project, is if it has the financial backing of some larger companies. And so I'm really excited to see kind of big open source take off like that.
Yeah. What do you think that could mean? If like we're able to get, it's like a flat playing field for everybody across the world. Yeah. I mean, if you can answer that question, you're doing pretty dang good, if you know what that could mean.
The interesting thing to me is we've kind of seen more and more of the development stack get eaten up by open source, right?
Yeah.
I think it probably started with Linux basically taking over the world of servers, right?
Yep.
Windows Server was still a thing, maybe 15 years ago or so.
Yeah, it depends who you're talking to still nowadays, but
sure. Yeah. I think something like 90% of servers now run on Linux.
Yeah.
It's really just eaten up the server space. And then, programming languages, databases, it's really hard to find proprietary, core infrastructure now. I think Kubernetes was kind of the next domino to fall, where now you can manage and orchestrate infrastructure with nothing but open source software at a really, enterprise scale. So the question to me is, like, how far does that go? Are we going to see at some point, consumer grade applications that are just backed by open source? I think Signal is a great example. The messaging app is totally open source, and it's a company that's making money. But it's really interesting to think about, like, will the next big social network be open source? Will the next big, photo sharing application be open source?
Sure.
I would love to see, consumer grade open source really be the next domino to fall there.
Yep, that's really cool. All right, Robert. Well, I mean, we covered a lot of things today. It was awesome, hearing about, I've known you for a long time, and hearing about what you're doing over at Google, and how you got addicted into what you're doing now. That means you're probably happy. It looks like you're happy. It looks like you're super excited.
For sure.
Looks like Fairwinds is a cool place to be right now. For our viewers out there today, I guess keeping in mind, the whole point of the DevDC podcast is to reach out and give our viewers, a source of like, conversation with folks like yourself who've been successful engineers, as well as an idea of like, hey, what a mentor would suggest, where they spend their time as they, come up through their career. Is there anything else that, you think you might want to share with us before we wrap things up?
No, I would just say, if you're looking to break into the software world, it's definitely, it's a competitive place these days, but
Yep.
it's a really fun place to be. And Fairwinds is hiring, so reach out
Yes, you
if you're
are.
looking for a gig.
And Kubernetes is a good place to be playing right now.
For sure.
All right. Well, thanks so much, Robert. During this time, like I said, we want to bring value to the listeners, largely folks in IT. So engineers, software developers. At the end of this podcast, I'll share my cell phone and email. And for the listeners out there, if there's anyone that, they want to bring on the podcast, please send me a note and I'll make sure to reach out to them. And we'll try to have great people like Robert Brennan on to be talking about where their careers at today, what they've done before, and where they see the world going. So thanks again, Robert. Appreciate the time. Have a wonderful day.
Yeah, thank you, Seamus. Have a good one.